Mark Hemingway is with us from the Weekly Standard. Mark, it's good to see you in studio tonight, sir.
Hey, it's great to be back.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. You had a post on the Weekly Standard blog about the Washington Post editorial that was literally blaming the NRA for ATF's Fast and Furious.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was absolutely astonishing. I should confess that up until a couple of months ago, I used to write the editorials for one of the rival papers here in town, the Washington Examiner. So I pay a lot of attention to what the Washington Post editorial page does.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this up front, and I'm saying this to make a larger point, which is the Washington Post editorial page is not bad. You know, it's very liberal in a lot of ways, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's generally very thoughtful. They've actually taken some courageous stands on things like public pensions and other things like that. They're great on a lot of local government issues. And I only say this because I consider the Washington Post editorial page to be one of the more reasonable voices of liberalism in this country. And I say that because it just goes to prove that every time the issue comes up involving guns around liberals, they collectively lose their mind. I mean, they have no frame of reference to deal with guns beyond whatever the issue is. If guns are involved, regulate them more and give the government more power to take them away from people.
Yeah, because what we're talking about here is a government agency that allowed U.S. laws to be broken, allowed guns to be sold over the objections of federally licensed firearms dealers who said, I don't really want to do this. Oh no, go ahead. You're really helping us out here. And then they watched repeatedly as these gun traffickers took the firearms across the border into Mexico, where they had no jurisdiction to investigate, and they just let the guns go. And we've had ATF field agents testify that they were told to stand down, to not interdict these guns, and yet the Washington Post says that lawmakers should give the ATF the tools it needs to fight illegal gun trafficking. Give them more power, Mark. Give them more authority and more funding.
Exactly. We don't even know what has happened with this scandal yet, and we don't begin to know the full extent of what's going on and who's responsible and these other things. And before we've even sorted it out, the Washington Post is using this to say that the real problem is the agency doesn't have enough power to regulate guns.
Yeah.
All right. And this is insane. There is no conceivable reason ever for a United States law enforcement agency to give 2,500 guns to criminal gangs in another country. Please explain to me what situation that would be acceptable in. And, here the Washington Post is, running away and excusing it. But the real kicker there was, I just couldn't believe it, was blaming the NRA. The NRA forced the ATF into doing this, utterly unthinkable thing under any circumstance by complaining about some of the things that the ATF has done in the past. I mean, this is insane. This is like the day after Chappaquiddick, the Washington Post wrote an editorial and said, the real problem is Chivas just makes such tasty scotch, and I mean, anyone with half a brain just, is not going to see the connection there.
Yeah, or the day after the Monica Lewinsky story broke. What is wrong with dry cleaners in this country? Really? Why can't we have better dry cleaners?
Right, exactly.
They close here by saying, we may never know whether the Bureau would have launched the Fast and Furious operation had it other more effective tools at its disposal. And again, this, I think, is one of the narratives that we're seeing here, that the agency was forced into doing this, or they had no other options because of the current gun laws. Tomorrow, Representative Elijah Cummings, who's the ranking minority member on the House Oversight Committee, is going to hold a forum, not a hearing, a forum on weak gun laws in this country. And, I think Paul Helmke of the Brady campaign is going to be there. They're going to have the anti-gun dog and pony show. That they will use to try to distract us from Fast and Furious and say, no, the real issue is still what we've been yelling about for a decade, gun control and our weak gun laws in this country. That's what they want to turn it back to. But, Mark, I'm trying to figure out, why wouldn't gun control groups be ticked off about Fast and Furious? They should be.
No, absolutely they should be. If the whole point of gun control is to keep, is to argue that stricter regulations would keep guns, out of the hands of dangerous, criminals.
Yeah.
Then how do you justify this? I mean, this is completely counter to the ultimate goal of, all these gun control regulations. But it's even worse because it wasn't like negligent private citizens. I mean, it was the government, the people that were supposed to be protecting us from, say, criminal gangs from Mexico, killing U.S., Border Patrol agents, were the perpetrators of this. I think that they would be as upset about this as possible. But no, it seems like they see a public relations opportunity.
Well, a public relations opportunity. And again, I think they're sticking up for the Obama administration. I think they're going all in, which is funny given that the Brady campaign and Paul Hunke famously gave Obama an F for I think his first 2 years in office. Mm-hmm. But where are they going to go? Where else are they going to go?
Well, that's absolutely true too. But I mean, this is also part of a larger thing here too, which is the Justice Department has been a goat rodeo since day one in this administration. I mean, there's been scandal after scandal, and I mean, Eric Holder, I think is it's fairly obvious to most thinking people that he's a fantastic degree of a healthy admixture of liberal utopianism and total incompetence that have guided everything that he's done, and I certainly think that in terms of setting an example at the top, that's in large part what this scandal is all about. But also, again, the ATF. Look, I don't want to disparage them too much because there are a lot of hardworking ATF agents, that do care about gun rights and putting their life on the line every single day. But that said, there's a long history of people at the top of the agency making some catastrophic decisions, in the last few decades, and something needs to be done in terms of what goes on and how they approach gun issues.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that you had ATF field agents who really were the first to blow the whistle on this, and now one of them apparently has received his termination papers.
Exactly. Yeah.
There are agents who were bothered by this, who want the agency to be a good, clean agency. But as you say, there are also a lot of problems. Now, what did you make of President Obama's very non-answer during his press conference today about Fast and Furious?
Well, again, this is another one of these things where, and this, is a near daily occurrence for people in my line of work, which is, sitting there and saying, what if this had happened under Bush? Can you imagine the screaming headlines, and as far as the Obama administration's approach this, it's just about damage control. I mean, the less he says about this or the less he's forced to say about it, all the better. And the press is just going to, mostly let him skate. I mean, don't get me wrong. They've done some due diligence on this and the stories have been filed and all that. But, are these above the fold New York Times stories? Is this leading NBC Nightly News, and other things like that? I mean, it's just not. Gathering that kind of momentum, and I think the Obama administration figures, as long as it stays kind of sub rosa, that they'll skate on through this, and there'll be no real consequences. Yeah,
one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of the mainstream coverage indicates that or suggests that this was a bungled operation, that something went wrong, and guns were lost, and guns were allowed to No. I mean, you go and you listen to these ATF field agents who testify before the House Oversight Committee, and they will tell you, this was the intent. Mm-hmm. It's not that we lost track of these guns. We weren't told to keep track of them. We were told to, watch them be sold and forget about it, and don't pursue this. And that's where I think a lot of the media is stopping. And I don't know if it's you gotta cover for the Obama administration, or if it just sounds so unbelievable to these reporters that they don't want to repeat what these ATF field agents are saying. But I'm still seeing in places like the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the suggestion that this was just an operation gone awry.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, but I mean, it really is, when you think about it, you get right down to it, 2,500 guns we're just going to hand over to criminals, and, that's the point. That is something that, in the press's defense, is really hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to believe that, any of your leaders would be so incompetent as to do something like that. But, again, the big issue for me here at this point in time is we need to know more about what happened here. We've got to find out and get to the bottom of this. I mean, this is a catastrophic failure of leadership. I mean, it is just absolutely, it's both infuriating and very sad in terms of the deaths it's caused. And, we have to find out who is responsible, and we can't shirk in that duty, and we have to hold those people accountable, as stringently as possible.
All right, and we've talked about the mainstream media and how they're covering this. What do you think about the conservative media? Again, I think you can find more coverage in the conservative media, but it's still not a huge story, Mark, at least for, a lot of the conservative online media outlets that I've seen.
Well, you got to remember the conservative online media, it's getting better, but it's still largely dependent on, piggybacking on, commenting on what the mainstream media is reporting.
Yeah.
So to some extent, that's sort of a problem. The mainstream media isn't paying as much attention to it, just by default. Those smaller conservative news organizations that don't have the resources, to send out them reporters and stuff are going to be dependent on, reacting to the news.
Mm-hmm.
However, that said, there have been a handful of outlets, PJTV in particular has been, really fantastic on top of this story, and a couple of other places that, have just been really, really good about, pushing it. My guess is we're going to see something that's akin to the new Black Panther voting rights scandal. Remember, where the two guys were videotaped in front of a polling place on election night in 2008, with weapons at a polling place, and the Justice Department dropped the investigation. The conservative media just, kept up the drumbeat because the story was so outrageous, that granted it never did come to a particularly satisfactory conclusion, but by the time that, 6 months of these conservative blogs browbeating this issue, the Washington Post and everyone else was taking it very, very seriously.
Right.
So I have a feeling if the mainstream media continues to ignore it, even though it's taken the conservative media a little bit more time to get up to speed, they're not going to let go of this. I mean, this is a big, important deal, and it goes into a larger pattern of failures of the Justice Department, I think, that have outraged a lot of people.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is there an accumulative effect on Eric Holder's reputation and Eric Holder's job stability? with every one of these scandals coming up.
Look, I honestly don't know what you could do at this point in time to make that guy's reputation any worse. And you remember when he came into office, he said a couple of just, crazy things about, Guantanamo and some other things like that. And it appeared that, the administration, grabbed him and sort of, yanked him back on the reservation. But since then, they've done just, any number of things that are just pure political insanity, like trying, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in downtown, New York City, and other things. And the administration just, gives these guys, gives given Holder an incredibly long leash. And I just don't know how much longer they can continue to do that. But, again, this is also an issue with Obama. Here's a guy that he's just doesn't see. He seems to be very happy to delegate things. He seems to be very happy to pawn off responsibility on, Congress and all these other things and not be hands-on with these things. When the reality is, it's his job as a leader when things are going really bad to take people that are technically subordinates like Eric Holder and get down in there and figure out what's wrong, and do something about it. And the president seems to have no interest in that whatsoever.
Absolutely. And by the way, as we're talking here, the latest from Paul Helmke of the Brady campaign, who's leaving in a few weeks, actually, leaving the agency, or leaving the group. Congress at fault in Fast and Furious gun operation. That's the name of his latest piece. And he says, quote, so rather than look at their complicity in the ATF's record in stopping gun trafficking, predictably, Congress's probe has narrowed to make the acting FBI director, Kenneth Melson, the primary target. That'd be acting ATF director, not FBI director, Paul, but... he's being pressured to resign for not properly managing the operation, but many federal officials, including Representative Issa, are not doing their part to end the lawlessness along the border and in our communities. You know what would help to end the lawlessness on the border, Mark?
What?
More law enforcement?
Yeah, no. Well, and a fence, but yes.
Yeah. Perhaps a way to keep the criminals out of the lawless border area. All right. Well, clearly the narrative is set for the Obama administration and their supporters, and I just hope that the truth has an opportunity to get out there against this narrative that's being pushed now.
Yeah. No. I think so. Look, the bottom line is depending on in the broadest context possible, again, this is going to have a cumulative effect. It's just one more thing that the president has sort of abdicated responsibility on. Eric Holder's abdicated responsibility on. And the thing is if the media is not paying attention, I think that the electorate is. I mean, there's a reason why. Far and away, the people with the most intensity as part of the electorate these days are, the people that don't like the president. And it's like, and part of that is a growing frustration over the fact that there's all kinds of scandals and ridiculous things that are happening, and nobody's holding anybody accountable. And I'm sorry, if a U.S. law enforcement agency gives 2,500 guns to Mexican criminal gangs that result in a number of people being killed, including a U.S. Border Patrol agent, people are going to be mad about that, and they should be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Mark, as always, sir, appreciate you coming in studio. You can find Mark's writing at theweeklystandard.com. And, Mark, look forward to doing this again soon. Thank you so much.